I'm Liz Brassaw, the Chief Flight Instructor from Thrust Flight. Today we're going to talk about how you know when you need a new flight instructor. I've worked here for about 6 years, and I've been a flight instructor for a lot longer than that.
My name is Patrick Arnzen. I'm a designated pilot examiner. I work real closely with Thrust Flight and Liz. I'm a former airline pilot and also a longtime flight instructor.
So I think one of the things that you should be looking for is, are you progressing, right? That's your flight instructor's job, is to get you from A to B. And if you're stuck in the middle somewhere and you're not progressing, it might be time for a new instructor.
I think that's a great point. You know, we're all going to hit plateaus somewhere in our flight training regime. But if you keep hitting plateau after plateau, or you're really just not getting it, that may be a really good time to find a new person.
Yeah. Well, and maybe as a new student, it's hard to tell, am I progressing or not, right? But usually what happens is the comparison game, right? I look at your other student, they started about the same time as me, they're soloing, I'm not soloing. They took their check ride, I haven't taken the check ride, right? So it's okay to ask questions to your CFI. And I think the answer you get is very telling, right? If the answer is, oh, it's just, you know, we need more time, or, right, it's a non-answer, then it might be time for a new flight instructor.
Well, that's a great point. You know, there are so many flight instructors out there that are wonderful, that do it because they love it. And there's a lot of flight instructors that are doing this simply as a stepping stone to get to the airline, and that's okay. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the people that are in that transition period between getting out of flight school and being a flight instructor to move on to the airlines, their heart's really, you know, it's just really not in it. Or maybe their heart was in it when they started the flight training, you know, or started becoming a flight instructor, but then they get burned out. Burnout for flight instructors is a very, very real thing. And I think, you know, most people can recognize that in a flight instructor, because you can tell their heart's not in it. You can tell that they're not invested in the student. You can tell that they're not really doing what it takes to give you the push or the really the encouragement to get you across the finish line, which is the pilot certificate.
Right? If you're in the run-up area and your instructor is telling you about his weekend plans and what happened with his family, and right, he's not invested you in what you're doing in that moment, time for a new flight instructor. If you ask your flight instructor why you haven't hit a certain milestone and they say, really the problem's you, I'm not sure you really want to do this, right? I mean, right there, I feel like they're not invested in me as a student.
Oh,
so.
no, absolutely. Well, and the other piece of this is that flight instructor giving you a plan? Are they laying out what this whole regimen is going to look like? Are they saying, okay, I need you to study this before you come. I need you to do this homework. And they're going to have a pre-brief with you before you go out and fly. And after you fly, you know, they're taking the time to debrief you and critique you and assess how well you did that day. I think that really shows that they're just in it for either a paycheck or for the flight time to make the move to the airlines.
I mean, another thing we really look for with our instructors, and I hope what everybody's looking for in their instructors, is the days that they take you flying as well. It's really clear to me if the instructor's in it for you as a student or in it for the hours on the day you go flying, right? If it's gusting 32 knots and you go flying, you need a new flight instructor. I mean, maybe not 100% of the cases, but most cases.
So. Yeah, if the winds are just clearly outside of or the ceiling or the visibility or whatever it is clearly outside of your capability and is going to consequently make that event unproductive, why do it? Why spend the money? You know, flight training is just so terribly expensive. To waste any money or any time flying when it's not going to be a productive situation is not ideal.
Another thing we get from students who transfer from other schools is, hey, my flight instructor never does ground with me. We've done a lot of flight training. I mean, do you think that's time for a new instructor, or do you think that's something that is the student's responsibility?
I think it really depends on the student. You know, I think there is no situation where the instructor should do absolutely no ground with the student. How much is appropriate is a different question. There are some very casual flight schools, you know, where they do things differently than we, you know, do them at Thrust, where we are training the next generation of airline pilots, or we are taking somebody in a really, really short period of time and we're making them a pilot. In that situation, yes, a lot of ground, a lot of attention is really required to get that person across the finish line and to meet the standards and to really truly make them a safe pilot.
So I mean, some schools have a lot of online ground training programs available, or I mean, there's a lot for sale just commercially on the market, and like you said, with each student they've got different needs, but it can't be zero. Your instructor has got to be able to take you to the end goal, which involves an exam of your oral and ground knowledge.
And how involved was your instructor with deciding what ground school to use. You know, the Kings have a program where essentially all of the ground is done online or via video, things like that, and it can be a very effective situation. Is that something that your instructor is engaged in, you know, and is asking you on a regular basis about, you know, are you progressing through this program? How familiar is your instructor with the program that you're using? One situation I think it might be a really good idea to find a new instructor is when you're questioning whether or not your instructor has the knowledge that he needs to teach you. You know, if you're questioning whether or not your instructor understands what it is that he or she is teaching, that could be a very big problem. Now, not everybody's going to know everything. You know, not everybody memorizes a FAR aim. You shouldn't be doing that. You know, but if you're finding that consistently your instructor is maybe making up answers, or you know, I find a lot of times if somebody doesn't know something, they just make up the answers so that they sound more intelligent, or because they don't want to admit when they don't know something. That's a very, very big problem as a flight instructor, is to be passing along bad information. You know, in the flight instructing world, if you're taught the wrong thing the first time, it's going to be really, really hard to unteach that situation. So I think that if you're questioning that, that may be a good indicator that it may be time to find somebody new.
I completely agree. At a 141 school, right, you have progress checks or stage checks, and a lot of times when you go into that stage check, you get asked questions you don't know the answer to. But if you don't know the answer because your instructor taught you the wrong answer or just didn't know the answer, right, that's a really revealing time of, I might need a new instructor, or at least a supplementary instructor, right? So let's say you're not training in an environment where that's built in. That's something I can do as a student to test my instructor a little bit, or test the waters, right?
Sure.
I want to book a lesson with another instructor. Maybe I pick a different time or something, right? So I have an excuse, right? Because I know a lot of people worry about offending their instructors, and then that way I get somebody who asks the questions a different way, and I can tell if my instructor was filling those gaps, filling those holes, or if I've been mistaught information.
Sure. Well, I can't tell you how many times people show up in a check ride and I'll ask somebody a question and it'll be clearly wrong. You know, it'll be just a situation where it's absolutely incorrect information. There's no basis for it all. It's not confusion between one thing or another. It's just straight up wrong answer. And at the debrief, I'll say, okay, so, you know, we had this issue in the check ride and you told me this. Where did that, you know, tell me about that. Well, that's what my instructor told me, you know. So instructors aren't perfect. You want to make sure that you do your research, do your homework, you know, and study this material well enough that you're not just parroting what your instructor tells you.
Well, and one thing we know that has a huge impact on the success of your flight training is the frequency you train. So if your instructor doesn't have time for you, you say, hey, can we add another flight lesson this week, right? And they say, I'm sorry, I'm booked. And that's a consistent answer. It's not a 1 week problem, right? It's a every week problem. It's probably time for a new flight instructor.
Oh, yeah. The research that we've done here at Thrust Flight indicates that if you stretch your flight training out to, say, maybe only 1 or 2 lessons a week, it's going to cost you as much as 60% more than if you're really loading those lessons up. And that may be all that you could legitimately do. But recency and the frequency in which you're training is just such a huge piece of what it is you're doing. So if you have the time available and your instructor doesn't, I would say that's absolutely time to try and find somebody new.
Yeah, I agree. The other big thing for me with it's time to get a new flight instructor is when you come to your lesson and they say, do you remember what we did last time?
That's
What?
a huge red flag, huge red flag. Or what are we working on today?
Yes.
Yes, and I can pretty much guarantee you at some point, if you've done any flight training at all, you've heard those words. You know, what are we working on today? Or it's buzzers and bells and whistles should go off and say, okay, we gotta change direction here.
Exactly right. So. Yeah, that is literally what I thought I hired you for. So I think we got a problem today.
Right. You know, I think a lot of times as students, as flight students, we tend to forget who the customer is, you know, and it's kind of a role reversal. You know, at the end of the day, you're paying a lot of money to become a pilot and to become a safe pilot. You know, if you're going to fly your family and you're going to fly with other people in the airspace, I mean, it's absolutely essential you get this right. And you have to remember, you are the customer. And it's okay to say, you know what, this relationship isn't working, you know, and demand, you know, the performance that you need.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So, you know, one thing that I think would be really interesting, and I'd love to see, is for those of you that have had these wonderful experiences with your flight instructors, and those of you that have had these nightmare experiences, we would just absolutely love to hear about it in the comment section below.
Yeah, I mean, I think we gave some good tips today, and hopefully it helps some of you that have been weighing the decision, do I need a new flight instructor or do I not, right? If you're interested in becoming a pilot or interested in becoming an instructor or ready to make that instructor change, visit our webpage at www.thrustflight.com. We'd love to have you join us. All right, I think that wraps up our video for today. Make sure to like the video, leave us a comment, and ring the bell so you don't miss out on future videos.